and our first speaker will be Constantine Pakavakis. Con is the secretary of PEN Melbourne's Writers for Peace. He championed PEN's advocacy for Julian Assange, and Con's been a strong critic of AUKUS. He's been a peace activist since the days of the Vietnam War, when he was arrested as a draft resistor. He's worked as a teacher, a principal and peace educator in schools, and produced an award-winning video called Solar Solutions, and published an anti-war novel he co-authored with his daughter Simone. The title of Con's address is The Emperor with No Clothes.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your kind words. And I'd like to thank John Shipton, for your invitation to me to speak today. Thank you, John. And I'd also like to thank the amazing team that has organised this conference today. You've assembled a truly elite cast of academics and specialists in their field. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them. I'm just a primary school teacher, but I'll gladly share my primary perspectives with you. So thank you all for being here today. Just check it. Yep. To ponder our existence on a living blue planet, the only one we know of. As Mary said, we face testing times, and we need cooperation more than competition. Cooperation requires trust, and trust is built on truth, transparency, and peace. Now, I'd like to acknowledge that we are here today on an ancient continent of 200 nations, each with their own language, and that we are on the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people, of the Kulin Nation, resilient survivors of the British Empire's colonial invasion, the consequence of a single lie. A lie originating with James Cook. Before starting on his expedition, Cook was given instructions by the British Admiralty. Cultivate a friendship and alliance with any natives, it said, if there are any. Cook certainly discovered natives inhabiting this land. He made many references to them in his diary, and even spent 7 weeks with them while his ship was being repaired from damage from the Great Barrier Reef. They left an impression on him, for he wrote, "The natives of New Holland are far more happier than we Europeans," but he chose to lie about their existence. He claimed the whole east coast as uninhabited and planted the seed of a plague of genocidal injustice. The evidence of Cook's lie is in his journal. It's available for everyone to see in the National Archives. Imagine if there had been a whistleblower at the time of Cook and a publisher like WikiLeaks. PEN International is a human rights organisation that recognises the importance of our imagination and freedom of expression. PEN has a tradition of having an empty chair at events to honour writers who cannot be with us, because they are detained, imprisoned, murdered, or in other ways silenced. We have an empty chair here today at the end with Julian's photo. Our empty chair is dedicated to Julian, a man of principle and undaunted courage who has created an unprecedented initiative for truth, transparency, and peace on a global scale. Now, unfortunately, some governments don't like truth, transparency, and peace. And when they feel threatened, creative people seem to be the first to be imprisoned. A recent German film was made focusing on PEN International's fight for freedom of expression. It showed 813 courageous writers, poets, journalists, and performing artists, all in prison or living in exile worldwide. Julian has been at the forefront of PEN International's list. In his recent High Court appeal hearing, there was an iron cage for Julian. And last time in court, he was kept in a glass cage. These hideous cages are a shameful attempt to portray him as dangerous, to promote a false narrative by the United States, by its so-called intelligence. Now, Julian has never been charged with violence. No one has ever accused him of being violent or having violent behaviour. So why the need for a cage in court? He has no convictions, but has spent over 14 years in detention. The last 5 years in Belmarsh, maximum security hellhole. Tortured 23 hours a day. He's only allowed out of his cell for 1 hour a day. His cell is a 2 metres by 3 metres box. I once stayed in the old Castlemaine prison, in such a prison cell. It was only on a school camp, but it was enough. I shiver to think of being contained for a long time in a cell like that. 2 weeks is actually considered officially as torture. One journalist commented that convicted Al-Qaeda terrorists in Belmarsh are treated better than Julian. The British have abandoned the principles of the Magna Carta: due process, fair trial, the presumption of innocence, and equality before the law. 14 years with no convictions. So much for innocent until proven guilty. And what happened to justice delayed is justice denied. Julian was dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy and arrested on April the 11th, 2019. For what? For a minor bail violation. In the Swedish case, involving an investigation where charges were never made. They've been dropped, no charges. A case where in 2010, the Swedish investigators were prepared to question Julian in London, but the British persuaded them not to in order to keep the extradition request alive. In 2013, Sweden informed the UK that they wanted to drop the extradition altogether, but the UK officials insisted they keep it open. These corrupt political efforts by the UK and Swedish authorities never even resulted in a single charge for anything at all. When Julian claimed political asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, he was entitled to it. His claim of political persecution has been proven correct many times over. He should never have been imprisoned on such a small bail violation and should be released immediately, as called for by a majority in our own parliament recently. Now let's turn our attention to our other so-called AUKUS ally, the United States. Oops, I've gone too far. A former US Superior Court judge, Andrew Napolitano, has publicly stated Julian Assange cannot get a fair trial in the United States. The bias, the prejudice, the exaggerated charges, the way he's been portrayed in the media will prevent him from getting a fair trial. And he will not only not get a fair trial, he'll never see the light of day. Greatly due to this man, Mike Pompeo. Where is the prejudice coming from that the judge is talking about? This man, Mike Pompeo, former CIA director, who said, "We have introduced a system by which we can identify our opponents in other countries, be it Al-Qaeda or ISIS, be it WikiLeaks or Hezbollah." Equating WikiLeaks with terrorist organisations is a deliberate tactic of publicly dehumanising the opposition. That's what the CIA do, in order to justify destroying them. Of course, you have to keep repeating it until the silent majority and the mainstream press also repeat it. Like the false claim of weapons of mass destruction used against Iraq to invade it. Look at this tweet from Pompeo. It shows another deliberate manipulation of the facts. He mentions an indicted hacker. He knew fully well that in 2019, a US federal judge had already dismissed this claim. Manning never hacked. She had full access to all the information already. That was part of her military job. No hacking. Imperil American security, he says, and protecting the young men and women who protect America. Really? That's pretty dangerous. This is about the claim of releasing dangerous unredacted material, a claim even repeated in the latest appeal by the lawyer for the US. US prosecutors have already acknowledged that there is not a single case of anyone being hurt by the WikiLeaks documents. Now, in court in 2020, evidence was presented that it was two Guardian journalists who released the unredacted Cablegate documents, not Julian. Julian actually called Hillary Clinton's office. A video of him doing this is on YouTube. You can video it. You can Google it. He wanted to inform Clinton's office that there was a security leak and to protect anyone who might be put at risk. And in 2017, BuzzFeed had published a secret 107-page Department of Defence report that specifically said that the WikiLeaks disclosures did not cause any real harm to US interests. And of course, we know Obama said, "The fact is, these documents don't reveal any issues that haven't already informed our public debate." Now, in September 21, Yahoo News published revelations of the CIA plotting to kill or kidnap Julian Assange. Their multiple sources were 30 former Trump officials who had been in discussions with Pompeo. He wanted revenge against Assange for publishing details of Vault 7, a secret CIA hacking tool manual. The article mentions kidnapping, discussions about killing Assange. It even requests sketches or options of how to assassinate him. And in 2020, Pompeo admitted on NBC, "We lied, we cheated, we stole, we had entire training courses." They're quite open and brash about it. So many irregularities in Julian's case, in both the US and the UK, yet the Australian governments of Gillard, Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison did nothing. The late defender of press freedom, Daniel Ellsberg, called Julian's case the legal scandal of the century. What a contrast with the view of George Brandis, former Attorney General and High Commissioner to the UK. On the ABC's Q&A, Brandis was asked if he made any representations on behalf of Julian. This is what he said: "I did not. It certainly was the Australian government's view that the legal proceedings and the extradition proceedings should run their course. And at no point did we seek to interfere with that process." And even when Julian was in court, there were no representatives from Australia there. They left 3 reserved seats empty. Didn't even bother to turn up. That's disgusting. I'm absolutely disgusted. We've heard a gaggle of Australian foreign ministers, attorney generals and the like, claim that they respect the legal processes of the UK and the US, with blind idiocy to the facts. Mr. Dutton and members of opposition who did not vote to free Julian recently, please take note. The judicial processes and treatment of Julian has not been normal. Is it normal in the UK for the CIA to set up internal surveillance in a foreign embassy, violating Julian's right to private consultations with his lawyers? I don't think so. Is it normal in the UK for the US to unlawfully steal the data from phones and devices of lawyers visiting a client? The CIA and Pompeo are currently being sued in the US for this. Is it normal for the CIA to plot the murder of journalists it doesn't like? The British courts and the Australian governments ignored the CIA discussions to kidnap or murder Julian. These illegal activities are evidence of politically motivated case by a nation that gives itself whatever authority it needs to achieve the American way. Like Superman in the 50s, who fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way, because they're all the same, of course. In 1904, Roosevelt believed that the US Monroe Doctrine gave international police power to the US. Madeleine Albright said, "If we have to use force, it's because we are America. We are the indispensable nation." In 1992, the Wolfowitz Doctrine called for US military preeminence and using it to shape the international system for American advantage. Educator Howard Gardner described one of the most chilling media encounters in recent memory, his words, when a journalist was told by a senior advisor to President George W. Bush, "That's not the way the world really works anymore. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do." An empire run by actors, indeed. In 2022, a filmmaker named Roger Stahl researched 30,000 pages of Defense Department documents and found that the Pentagon and the CIA have exercised direct editorial control over more than 2,500 films and television shows, mostly about war. They believe in their own superiority, infallibility, and most dangerously, their own creation of reality. How can they be trusted? Look at the AUKUS deal. What a deal that is. For $365 billion, we get 8 nuclear-powered submarines that will be controlled by the US. Only 3 will ever be in operation at any given time, and that will be for patrolling the Chinese coast, not as part of the US strategic containment of China, not for protecting the coast of Australia. $365 billion, and we can't even close the gap. Fires and floods ravage our country. Basic housing is in crisis. I could go on, I won't. Look at this CNN article, Pompeo again. When I saw it, I couldn't believe it. The melting ice, the melting Arctic ice, presents new opportunities for trade, he says. Really? Is this the mentality that we are following as a country? Everything is a money-making opportunity in the eyes of the US, especially war, and Australia's integration into US military and foreign policies. It makes Australia complicit in the Gaza genocide. This is a graph showing countries with the highest military spending worldwide in 2022. At the top is the US. The path they are taking Australia on is that of militarisation. Their military spending is more than the next 5 highest nations all put together: China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, and the UK. We don't want involvement in its proxy wars, like the next one against China. The US has lost its way. Politicians, human rights, media, medical, religious and peace organisations around the world demand Julian's freedom. But the US continues persecuting him. The US acts like an emperor with no clothes. But even they cannot deny the truths displayed in the collateral murder videos. Now I end with a question to the members of the Australian Parliament who did not support the vote calling for Julian's release, and to the US President and the UK Home Secretary and the judges hearing the case. Here's my question. What would you do if this video of collateral murder arrived? What would you do with it? Thank you.
Thanks very much to Con.